Okay, let's jump in here. Okay, so wow, did I answer all these questions last time? Okay. So we're gonna jump back in here. I think we should be able to finish up with concepts and theories today and move into culture. Off, on, off. Dim this a little bit. Okay, that's perfect-ish, I guess. I don't know what I've done. Okay, we're gonna live with this. We're gonna live with this. It's gonna be great. Okay, so let me answer some questions here. Okay, but first, before I do that, I just want to kind of come back, talk about a couple of things, and then we will we'll jump in to content. So we ended off last time talking about feminism, right, and particular feminist notions of how the world works and what they're interested in studying. So, like I said last time, feminism is incredibly varied. Right? There are different schools of feminism. I would say the one that sort of dominates universities today would be a strain of a critical or conflict feminism that views, the kind of central kind of dynamic of society as men oppressing women, right? And men exerting their power over women, and especially like when you get to sort of the how shall we say, the Marxist constructions of this, right? Friedrich Engels, who was Marx's co-author of books like the Communist Manifesto, and in a lot of ways Marx's sugar daddy, because Marx was flat broke through most of his life, and he depended on his good friend Engels to provide the funds. Engels' dad was a rich capitalist, so he had lots of money, so he's the one who paid for Marx to do most of his work. And occasionally, though Engels is an exceptional thinker, and Marx is a tremendous thinker, to assuage Engels' ego, Marx would include him as one of the authors of stuff, though it's highly likely Engels never wrote much of value. But one of the things that Engels suggests about capitalist society and about particularly men in capitalist society is that the desire of men is to control women, particularly sexually, and to make sure that property and wealth is passed on only to their male heirs, right? And that this is one of the ways that men dominate women economically, by denying them things like inheritance and opportunity. Okay, so, feminism, I think we kind of ended on this point, in lots of ways thinks of gender, right, our norms around gender as socially constructed, because of the way we treat boys and girls in childhood, right? And this is what we saw in this video, which I will not replay. But it was, I know half the people were leaving because I played it right at the end of class. That's okay. Basically, right, it's a sort of like quasi-experiment where essentially they take this, a bunch of kids, dress them in the clothes of the opposite sex, and then see if that changes the way that adults interact with them at the end of the day. So, okay, that's where we ended off. So let me read these questions. I might have answered this last time. Is feminist theory just for women's inequality or different aspects of society, like Black Lives Matter? Feminist theory, like I think I said this last time, feminist theory eventually sort of picks up what's called intersectionality, right? And this comes from I think it's a Harvard legal scholar. Her name is Kimberly Crenshaw. And she comes up with this idea that, in capitalist patriarchal societies, there's overlapping kind of levels of oppression that people suffer, right? That basically where you kind of would want to look at people's oppression is to be like, okay, if you've got a woman, that's one level of oppression. If you've got a black woman, that's a second level of oppression, right? If you've got a black lesbian woman, right, then that person is experiencing sort of 3 overlapping patterns of oppression. So it's complicated, but eventually, what lecture slide title this? We're still in concepts and theories, friends. There's a lot of concepts and a lot of theories, but don't worry, we'll come back to them over and over, so it pays off at the end. But yeah, like basically, eventually, like these overlapping patterns of oppression that conflict theory is really focused on get talked about through a feminist lens, and especially in the ways that different kinds of identities can overlap to create different kinds of power inequalities. Okay, so I answered you. Let's clear that off. Who's winning the Super Bowl? That depends. Who's playing? I don't know, because I don't actually follow football. So the team with the best players is winning the Super Bowl. I'm going to go with that. Yeah, not my sport, sadly. Never could quite get into football. I did go to a few, like, Edmonton at the time, Eskimos, now Elks games, when I had a really, really hot girlfriend who really liked football, but it was more about the girlfriend than the football, to be perfectly honest, and I found football to be very, very cold, because Commonwealth Stadium is not the warmest of places, but I think I haven't gone to a football game since we broke up, and we broke up, in the 12th grade, so it's been a while. It's funny because my wife also watched football with a boyfriend in high school. Not me, totally different, but we both had the same experience. So it's kind of a strange point that we always find vibes really well. The Bills better win or my cat is accidentally falling off my balcony. I don't think it's your cat's fault. I don't think your cat has anything to do with the outcome of the game, so throw yourself off the balcony instead. No, I'm kidding. Clearly, you're the problem. No, I'm kidding. Don't do that. That's not advice. I'm kidding, of course, 100%. Do not self-harm. If you think about it, call the suicide helpline. And it's not working. Yeah, I'm gonna defer to people who care about what Elon was thinking. He is, an interesting figure, but not that interesting. Okay, so let's talk some actual sociology questions. How does post-structuralism differ from social constructionism? Both talk about inconsistent social structures. How would you say that gender is viewed by both theories? Okay, I mean, social constructionism, it depends on the school of social constructionism, but I think broadly they would say, and again, it depends on the era, but a lot of social constructionists would view a lot of the aspects of how gender is expressed as socially constructed, right? Like our idea that, boys wear blue and girls wear pink, right, is clearly something that's socially constructed. It could be different, or that women should wear their hair long, right? And beauty standards, all of these things are socially constructed. I mean, probably the big difference with post-structuralism would be that post-structuralism would view, any kind of construction of gender as a power play, right? As something that is fundamentally allowing one group to dominate over others, right? So, our construction of gender typically within this binary is done for the benefit of, heterosexual people, heterosexual males in particular, excluding any other kind of possible identities, right? But it's, in saying that there are two genders, it's about power, right? It's a statement that affirms a certain power relationship within society. You're right, it does say it's social research. We'll do social research. I realized that after I said it, and it's actually in the back of my head. It's a super fun unit. Okay. Oh, don't worry about the waves of feminist theory. I say that only for interest, but even, feminist scholars sometimes get the waves mixed up. So, okay, how did the patriarchy develop? Okay, I'll come to that one. There's a premium. I don't know what that means. Okay. Do you think American books about feminism being banned will lead to more widespread growth in Are American books about feminism being banned? I hadn't heard this. I don't know. I hope that's not true. Come back to me with a list and I'll tell you. Okay, when Donald Trump only two genders, when Donald Trump says there's only two genders, male and female, does that reject the idea of feminism for transgenders and LGBT SHQ plus? Okay, so yes, 100%. Now this is a step, right? This is a move that Donald Trump is making, and it's in particular a reaction to a lot of the pushback in his base against these ideas, right? For whatever reason, right, social, cultural, class, religion, whatever it happens to be, the base of the Republican Party, which is overwhelmingly kind of working class, really doesn't like, ideas around, transgender rights or transgender people as it's constructed within kind of the culture. Two of the most kind of gotcha, most popular ads that probably really helped catapult Trump to the presidency were both around kind of transgender questions, right? And so, his saying that is very much aimed at kind of discrediting, queer theory, gender theory, but from a very base level, right? Kind of like reestablishing a much more kind of traditionally normative way of viewing gender, right? And again, there's a whole bunch of things going on here. Like the Democrats have been constructed by the Republicans as, woke, and part of woke is LGBTQ kind of ideas, and particularly recently ideas about gender fluidity and gender as a social construct. And so, in doing what he did yesterday, it's absolutely meant to sort of boot these ideas out of the current administration. Now, I don't think those ideas are going anywhere. I think they are now out in the ethos, and they've disseminated to the point where especially a lot of Gen Z widely accepts them, but it's certainly a pushback against this idea. Okay, wow, these are questions. Okay, I answered this question. Will that mean more LGBTQ and gender fluid individuals will come to Canada? I don't know. That's up to them, I guess. It's possible, but Canada has its own problems, so that might not be a living option either. Cost of living, no housing, all this stuff. So grounds to say that these gender dynamics are biologically determined. So lots of people have made, arguments to this effect, right? That at least certain aspects of gender and of gendered norms have at least some kind of biological basis. Right? This is certainly an argument that you find out there. If you look at someone like Dr. Leonard Sachs, who's a psychologist and pediatrician, right? He very much makes this, this argument that there are certain aspects of gender that seem to be deeply biologically rooted, but then, it's widely disputed, and, feminist thinkers, queer theorists, and others would widely dispute those assertions. So it depends, I think, on how you read the evidence, right? And what evidence you think gets primacy. Is it more kind of, the fact that there is a tremendous amount of gender expression that happens within populations, or that, if you look at the average male, the average female, there are certain traits that tend to predominate, right? For example, males tend to be more aggressive on the whole than females. Females on the whole tend to care more about things like interpersonal relationships. Males tend to care a lot more about sports. Females don't, for the most part. Again, now these are big kind of like average statements, like, this is like bell curve thinking. What's at the middle of the bell curve is, men are more aggressive, right? And there's, that bell curve is further over for men in terms of aggression. If you took the 100 most aggressive people in Canadian society, 99 of them would be men, right? But that's like averages. That doesn't mean that there's not a lot of people that fall outside those averages on either side. So again, it really depends on how you read the evidence. Okay, these are really interesting questions. And I don't know if they're just a stall, but I'll answer. I don't know if I can answer this one. Of a Trump kind of president in Canada. I'm not a political scientist because political science isn't real. It's a fake discipline. It's not actually a science of any kind. Okay, now that I've thrown shade at political science, I would tend to think no. I think Canada has enough of a distinct kind of political culture that I don't think, you can certainly have like a conservative, right? And Pierre Poilievre certainly is conservative, but if you held Pierre Poilievre next to the average Republican, he looks much more like a Democrat in most ways. So I don't think Canada has the kind of culture that would allow it, but I could be proven wrong. And certainly Maxime Bernier got absolutely nowhere with his People's Party of Canada, which is a happy thing. Okay, this is a really interesting question, and this brings me back to my anthropology days, brief as they were. How did patriarchy develop when many ancient isolated cultures praised and protected women due to being able to give birth? So the truth is we don't really know. We don't really know, and much of this is sort of lost to history. There are a lot of theories. Are we going to complete 4 chapters before the test? Almost certainly not. I always schedule it that way and I never make it, so probably not. I'm very, very bad. So there is this theory that basically Western European cultures were primarily matriarchal until a particular culture came in from, what would be kind of modern day Ukraine and Russia, the kind of Russian steppe, called the Kurgan culture. And the Kurgan culture came in and they were a warrior culture, right, principally led by men, and they came in and they basically, took over all of these matriarchal cultures and shifted them to patriarchal. That's a sort of theory, and there's some biological evidence. Like if you look at the anthropology, there's certain genes that sort of start to move in at a certain point archaeologically and sort of start to take over, and they're definitely from the Russian steppe. Right, so if you are of the opinion that we should hate Russians, well, there's another reason, right? Because there's a theory that they destroyed matriarchal cultures. But aside from that, it seems to be a pretty normal pattern of kind of human development after a certain point. Once you get agriculture, and especially once you get organized warfare, men do a lot of that just because of differences in physical strength, and cultures tend to, though not always, shift to sort of a patriarchal focus. Anyway, this is a whole section of Anthropology 100 that you could talk about, but it's interesting. It's not our purpose. Okay, it only took me 24 minutes to get here. All good. All right, we'll try to go fast through the end of this and move on to how people do sociological research. A thrilling lecture that usually takes about an hour. Okay. So modern feminism. So modern feminism, really doesn't have much of an impact until the mid-60s, and really until the late 60s. 1968 is a big pivot point for a lot of sociological theories. There's a big kind of social movements happening in continental Europe, particularly in France, and a lot of the influential thinkers like Foucault and the people in his orbit sort of start to gain influence in North America. You get the rise of kind of the modern women's movement, in parallel with sort of anti-war movements in the U.S. What is sometimes called the women's liberation movement, with birth control becoming available at the end of the 1950s, I think in 1958, and big economic changes that have created a lot more jobs that women find more appealing and can do more easily. Less manual labor, more service industry jobs. There's a big push for women's equality, and feminism sort of enters, the academy in major ways and becomes a major kind of sociological concern. And yeah, the main sources of gender inequality, according to feminism, right, the way boys and girls are raised, how we treat them, how we play with them, how we structure their interests. And think of it, right, like for most people, right, when you think of all the gender reveal parties, right, they either explode something blue or pink, announcing what kind of person is about to be born. And, the second that happens, you as a person go and buy correctly gendered baby uniforms. If it's a girl, you're going to get something pink with a unicorn and a rainbow on it. If it's a boy, it comes in blue with a tractor. And people construct gender this way right from, before birth and at birth. We start to structure people's experiences in gendered ways according to kind of feminist arguments, right? And this creates, barriers to equal opportunity in education, paid work, and politics. And one of the big complaints of feminism is the unequal distribution of work, particularly domestic work between women and men, where generally speaking, especially after children are born, women do about 80% of domestic labor, and men do the remaining 20%. Those are sort of historical patterns. Okay, so I'm gonna take a quick drink of my tea. All right, so one thing, to kind of wrap up all of these schools of thought before we move into some kind of final concerns for concepts and theories, and then move into talking a little bit about what social research looks like very briefly. One of the things that, that can be kind of useful is to look at how the four schools of thought might interpret different phenomena, right? Or a particular kind of thing happening in society. So, if we take the fashion cycles, right? So we know, right? I hope we know, that as part of kind of the society we live in, right, there is a fashion industry, right? You have your fashion industry, and the fashion industry is tasked essentially with producing, principally clothing, and telling you what is cool, what's hip, what you should be wearing, like what, a certain kind of person should wear, and, if you are wearing this particular brand of clothing or this style, what that says about you. We can look at, like every season, there's new clothing out, right? There's different colors come in and go out, and all of this stuff with the fashion industry. So we can look at this through our kind of four of our big theoretical lenses, functionalism, conflict theory, symbolic interactionism, and feminism, and we get very different interpretations of this phenomenon. Now, none of these are necessarily right. And it's not about being right. Each of them, because it has a slightly different way of understanding social phenomenon, can give us different insights. And hopefully, right, if we look at them holistically, we can get a good sense of what's going on with a particular social phenomenon. Okay, so the fashion system, right, or the fashion cycles. How would a functionalist interpret it? Well, you can think of it this way, right? For functionalists, clothing performs an important social function, right? In particular, functionalists will tell you that it is important and sorry, let me slow my brain down half a sec. It is useful in helping to reaffirm kind of an orderly class structure, right? So think of it this way, right? If you have two people, one is wearing like an Armani suit, and the other one is wearing Carhartts, right? Let's say those Carhartts are camouflage colored too, right? Immediately, like, can you picture these two people in your head, right? One wearing the Armani suit, one person, wearing Carhartts. You immediately sort of know what social classes you are dealing with, right? So if you're talking the Armani suit, right, you're probably talking someone, that screen, I keep wanting to write on that screen. You're probably talking about someone who's in the elite, right? So that's Armani is elite. And, Carhartt is working class, right? So there's a very clear class distinction. Even in this room, right? Like, generally speaking, you are all dressed casually. So when you're walking around on campus and I see most of you, I know you're students. I'm wearing, a dress shirt because my dad taught me that, once you get into the working world, all of your shirts should have buttons. I don't know if that's true, but it was a value. Oh, I mean, he's still alive. He's not dead. I shouldn't talk about him in the past tense. It's a value that he holds very, very closely to, right? When he went to work at his office, he always had a button-up shirt. So, marking us off, right? Immediately, if you walked into this room, it's pretty clear who the students are and who the professor is based on how we're dressed. Also, I'm old, bald, fat, and ugly, so that kind of marks me off in different ways. So, most of you are not bald at very least. So, fashion plays this role in distinguishing, power relations within spaces, between individuals, between social classes, right? And it's useful because immediately we can tell who's who, right? And we can tell, if you go to the club, and you see someone attractive based on how they're dressed, you can probably sort of make assumptions about social class and whether you have a shot with this person or not, right? So all of these things are really useful in a social context. Okay, so that's functionalism, right? Fashion has a function. It helps maintain kind of social order by telling you who's who in the kind of hierarchy. Okay, so conflict theory, right? So these are Marxists, and they're interested in economic questions and social oppression in different ways. So fashion and the constant kind of changes in fashion essentially are a way of constantly generating profit. And this is a very Herbert Marcuse sort of reading. I'm going to erase my boxes so I can write a little bit here. That one of the things that, fashion does is it creates false need. Right? Because once you have, purchased clothing, especially modern clothing, lasts a pretty long time, right? It's relatively high quality, it's pretty durable. You could wear the same clothes for a really, really long time. But for conflict theory, that would be really bad for the capitalists, right? You wouldn't want Tommy Hilfiger or Calvin Klein or whoever their heirs are to starve because you bought, one suit, one dress shirt, or enough to clothe you for a whole week, and then you never went back to buy any more, right? The poor capitalists would starve to death in that world. So what the fashion cycle does is it creates false need, right? You actually don't need those new fashions, right? They're just clothing. Sure, they look nice and they're new, but they have no greater function than the clothes you already own. You only need to replace clothes when it wears out, and it doesn't wear out that frequently. But one of the ways that they keep you buying, and therefore, right, and there's all sorts of things in kind of conflict theory that go with this, one of the ways that they keep you buying, and therefore they keep you going back to work to earn more wages so you can afford to buy that new fashion at Zara or wherever the heck you shop. Thankfully, my 15-year-old still thinks Walmart is a great place to shop. I'm going to try to keep it that way as long as possible. But, right, is by creating this false sense that there's something newer, better, and that you need to keep up with the fashions, if you're going to remain socially viable or whatever it happens to be, right? That you need to not have the clothes from 5 years ago because people will immediately know that that is, unfashionable. So the fashion cycle is a way that industry owners make big profit, right? By convincing you that you need to buy that new whatever, those new clothes that you don't actually need. And then you keep going to work, earning wages and providing labor, which makes the owners of big industry even more money, right? So this false needs keeps you in slavery to capitalism. I know, that went dark, but that's how it goes. Okay, symbolic interactionism. Fashion helps us express our shifting identities. Symbolic interactionists here would think of the clothing that you wear, as basically a way that we symbolically, almost like a peacock, right? You are peacocks. That's what symbolic interactionists say. Kind of. You use it to signal to others what your identity is. And it's a way that we can very easily, take off and put on new identities and try out different ways of being in the world. So very quick example, right? And this one always makes me laugh a little bit. Because every now and then, walking around on the U of A campus, I will see someone wearing, and someone way too young to have actually attended, wearing like a Harvard University sweatshirt, right? Now, I have pretty good confidence that most of these people did not attend Harvard. So why wear a Harvard University sweatshirt when you're attending the U of A? Well, I think it's very clearly like, well, I don't know, to me, maybe I'm reading it wrong. It's like, I'm better than this place. I may be going to U of A right now, but I'm really a Harvard person or an Oxford person, right? But think about any other kind of thing going on with someone, think about some of your friends in high school, right? Or junior high that tried out a bunch of different fashions, right? Maybe they went a little bit emo for a while, right? And they started wearing dark clothes with dark makeup and trying that identity on, right? This is the symbolic interactionist kind of thing, right? Fashion helps us express our shifting identities. I have a good friend, someone I grew up with and went to school with, very working class guy, right? He's a plumber, wonderful person, but he loves camo, like loves everything he owns is some shade of camo. And at his wedding, I swear to God, I was in his wedding, it was embarrassing. The ties, he had them custom made and they were camouflage ties, right? It's hilarious. You should see the picture. I will never show them to anyone because they are so embarrassing. Like this green camouflage tie, and it's like, why am I here? Honestly, spent a ton of money having someone custom make camouflage ties. I still have it. I just refuse to throw it out or ever wear it again. But right, this expresses his identity. He's like a big outdoorsy guy. He's a hunter, right? He's a tough guy. Compared to me, he could absolutely beat the shit out of me super easily. Like, I can't even tell you. He fixed my water heater at my house. It's like this hot water tank. And he just like grabs it with his two arms and lifts it out and carries it up the stairs. I'm like, I would have died. Very different kind of guy. But that camo says something about him, right? It's meant to express his identity. He's working class. He's an outdoorsy guy. He's a hunter. And you know all of that the second you meet him, I swear. So that's what, symbolic interactions would say. Fashion and the fashion cycle, the kind of clothes that's produced, gives us ways of expressing ourselves and telling others who we are. Okay, and then feminism. Feminism. Fashion is a form of patriarchy. So this is usually expressed in a way, women's fashions are constantly shifting, right? Men's fashions are pretty stable. Like they do shift around, men's fashions change a bit, but outside of the suit, the dress shirt, and a couple of variations, men's fashion is very stable. It's like a thinner lapel, a thinner tie. There's not a ton of variation in men's fashions. Women's fashions are a totally different story. And particularly, one of the things that feminists will suggest is that women's fashion really exists for the visual pleasure of men. Right? So that a lot of fashion is about accentuating the female form, right? To make the female form more pleasant to look upon for men, right? So it's a form of kind of continued oppression. It has no really vital purpose, right? Low-cut tops and form-fitting yoga pants have no real vital purpose. They could be otherwise, but they exist so that women can be looked upon by men, with the men's lusty eyes and all that jazz. So that's what the fashion cycle does in kind of feminism, right? Again, even something as kind of straightforward as like the fact that if you go into the average shopping mall or you go to West Edmonton Mall, there are like 5 or 6 stores, I think, dedicated exclusively to women's undergarments and precisely 0 stores dedicated to men's undergarments. How shall we put it? Really, really big posters of, women in their underwear in most shopping centers to announce, Victoria's Secret is there, right, suggests that there's an aspect of women's clothing and the fashion industry that's very much there, for men's consumption as well. Okay. Wow, so many questions. I don't remember gender reveal parties before 2010. Is that an example of a custom invented to push against certain social changes? I don't know if it's to push against certain social changes. I don't actually know, but certainly it was not common, when I was having my 2 older kids. And I don't know when it became a thing, honestly. So I don't know, maybe. Okay. Do I think the increase in poor quality clothing and fast fashion is a result of the need of the fashion industry to make a profit? That's certainly the conflict theory sort of explanation, right? Cheaper clothing made at a very low cost by capitalists, definitely would allow you to sell more and more of it because it would wear out faster, and all of this stuff. Definitely good for the profits of, say, H&M. Maybe not great for you as a consumer, but it keeps you coming back. So that's definitely the conflict theory explanation. Would the concept of fashion in feminist theory be related to conflict theory of feminism? Like, instead of businesses dictating fashion, men dictate fashion? I mean, I think you've got it. The thing about it would be probably they wouldn't make the distinction between business and men. They would say that business is overwhelmingly dominated by men, and therefore it is, still men dictating fashion. And I mean, for a long time, I don't really follow fashion that closely. I'm not going to lie. But some of the more prominent kind of fashion designers were all men, right? So people like Calvin Klein, Tommy Hilfiger. So these were very much, and I think it was Tommy Hilfiger at one point, who had made derogatory comments, about not wanting black women to wear his clothes because, he didn't like the way they fit on black women, right? Suggesting he was a piece of garbage, suggesting that, right, there was this like visual pleasure sort of aspect to it. So I think that works. So is conflict theory related to Canada's mass deportation of illegal immigrants to India, and does assuming they are illegal create false assumptions? I mean, there are certainly conflict theory perspectives. Like if you looked at something like critical race theory is a conflict theory around race. But for that specific issue, I'll be honest, I don't know enough about it to really comment. Would it be wrong to say that women also contribute negatively towards fashion by constant self-comparison to models? What I think, especially say someone like Foucault, or one of Foucault's close associates was a feminist named Julia Kristeva. And I think what Kristeva would say is that women, in doing this comparison to models, have internalized the means of their own repression, right? They've allowed themselves to turn into visual objects for men's pleasure by internalizing those norms and internalizing the idea that that model's body represents some kind of social and cultural ideal. Okay, these are great questions, but you would have to, sorry, I don't know the reason behind the name Lululemon. I assumed it was just something stupid. But, so I can't comment on that one because I don't know. Would the name of clothing brands have anything to do with this? Yeah, so I don't know the reason. Maybe you can come tell me what it is after class. Trend of revealing clothing in women's shops linked to the feminist movement, reinforce patriarchal culture. This is actually a really interesting question. Oh, that's bad. That's really mean. That's shitty. And now, yeah, okay. I didn't know that. Okay, now I'll never look at Lululemon again. But my goal was to never look at Lululemon anyway. So there you go. So, okay, I think I answered this question. Okay, now we don't need to. We all got what the racist comment was. Okay, so I don't revealing. Yeah, again, I think this this trend of revealing clothing in female shops would be that reinforcement of internalized repression for women, right? That you seek those beauty norms, and so even if it's often framed as like dress how you want, be liberated, right? Dress in revealing clothes if that makes you happy, right? This is often the way it's framed, but I think a lot of feminists, especially like second wave feminists, would be like, someone like Andrea Dworkin or Catherine McRobbie would say, actually, this kind of dress is often, again, in the service of the patriarchy, and in your quest for feminine liberation, you've actually internalized, the patriarchy in weird ways. And so the patriarchy corrupts feminism even when feminism doesn't want it to. Okay. Brittany Griner be in favor of masculinity or feminism as she considers herself. Okay, I don't, all I know is that she was detained in Russia for having like marijuana oil, and that's all I know about Brittany Griner, to be perfectly honest. And she got traded for an arms merchant, Victor Boot. But aside from that, I know nothing. Okay, I don't get how feminism and fashion relates. Can I just repeat the last bit? Yeah, sure. Right, when feminists think of the fashion industry, right? Fashion, in a lot of ways, especially think of how fashion often, is for women about appearing attractive, right? You want to be in attractive clothing, right? You want to look good. You often want to accentuate kind of the female form. What feminists would say is this is often, while women might think that it's empowering, it's often, constructed by men for the visual pleasure of men, because men like to look at women's bodies is the sort of general understanding. And therefore, right, it's not a form of empowerment, right? Fashion is really just a way that patriarchy oppresses women by turning them into objects to be looked at, right? Rather than seeing them as a whole person. I hope that helps. Okay. All right, all right, I kind of said this beforehand, right? Each type gives a certain aspect of the fashion industry, something that we can know about it. If we look at them all, right, something that we take for granted, like fashion, clothing, right? We often take it for granted that it's just there and it's a normative part of existence, but there are social aspects to it. So each of these schools can tell us something different about that, right? And so our four schools, when taken together, paint an interesting social picture of something like fashion. Okay, so a couple more, bless you. I'm just gonna check how many slides I have left. Okay, I got like 4 slides and we're gonna shift to something else. That'll take me half a second to open it up, but that'll be fine. So one of the kind of interesting things we're living through, right? So a lot of what we've sort of talked about, right? The origins of sociology comes from the Industrial Revolution, right? That was one of the big things that interested Marx, Durkheim, and Weber. We're now living through, potentially a completely different era, right? Something totally new is happening, and some people have called this the post-industrial revolution. And then potentially, right, and here, I'm not 100% sold on that this is going to be as revolutionary as people are claiming, but maybe I'm wrong. I've been wrong before. People are now talking about the AI revolution. And I'm hoping it can do better than producing really mediocre essays in my senior seminars. But we're living through these kind of new revolutions, right? Technology-driven shifts, changing the way that we work economically, right? The post-industrial revolution, especially in Western countries, has shifted a lot of the manufacturing offshores and moved more people into service industries, which has fundamentally transformed a lot of aspects of the way we live, right? And all forms of human activity. And if Marx is right, that a lot of our social relationships come from the way that we produce things, right? We're now producing things differently and living through a kind of shift in the social relations of production that come from the shift to a post-industrial world where you don't make stuff, right? Increasingly, you give services, right? So things like teaching healthcare, engineering, computer programming, right, are the big fields that are kind of replacing, manufacturing things like cars and auto parts and that kind of stuff, and farming and all that stuff. Okay, so now there's 2 kind of possible kind of ways that society can move, right? And we've seen, in a lot of ways, as we've kind of moved through the industrial period into the post-industrial period, there's certain ways that society has enabled greater freedom, but there's also ways that it constrains us more than in the past. So, kind of like what Smith was saying in that quote from the beginning of the course, right? The sacred project of American sociology. Today, people are much freer to form, construct their identities and form social relationships in the ways that suit them, right? One of the things that's almost universally true is that any identity that you were given that you didn't choose, there's a sense that you're free to shrug that off, right? So if you were born Catholic, but you don't want to be Catholic, it's now perfectly socially acceptable to deconvert, right? To become nothing in particular or convert to Islam or whatever you want, right? If you were born, if you are kind of, what's the language that's used here? Assigned male at birth, but you feel like you're a woman, right? You're increasingly free to identify as a woman, right? So these are things, we see increasing social freedom, right? People can identify however they want. We're also, freer through global communications and, the technologies we have, to see things from all over the world, to consume cultural products in a way that was not possible before, to move around, right? There's lots of international migration happening and all that. There's more sexual diversity than at any point in the past, right? More kinds of identities, and it's much more accepted. And increasingly, newer and different family forms, and increasingly, right, we live in, especially in the West, in increasingly ethnically and racially diverse societies. Now, there are some ways that modern life also constrains us. So there are really strong pushes for conformity, right? One of these is consumerism, right? You are meant to consume, and there are certain brands that are good and that you're told you should own, and all of these sorts of things. Much of it pushed through advertising. New technologies, that encourage conformist behavior. This is maybe in a sense the idea of like cancel culture. Social media can be really good at pushing social conformity and punishing social divergence. And then, cultural consumption, increasingly driven by large, profit-driven American-owned corporations, and sometimes this is framed as the idea or the fear of, cultural imperialism, or that Disney will take over everything, right? We'll talk about that later. And a risk of loss of cultural diversity as the world, becomes more homogenous. Everybody's listening to Taylor Swift, so everybody stops listening to the music of their own cultures. Okay. How does Western culture control us by creating a false sense of freedom, claiming we can express our opinions, but not allowing us to act on them? In so many ways, I guess. Can I answer this? Yeah, there's lots of ways this happens, and maybe we'll talk about it as we move through the course. Oops, I cleared that question. Maybe I didn't want to answer it in the back of my mind. I mean, I think obviously there would be people, right, who would claim that ethnicity is just a concept, like socially constructed concept like any other, and you should be allowed to identify as any ethnicity that you want. I think that's still a kind of fringe claim, right? Not many people would back that up, but it certainly is a claim that is out there, right? But again, it's intersecting with things like racism and other things that make it really difficult. Okay, I'm going to ignore this question because it's so broad that it's hard to answer. If you want to talk about that, you can go talk to me. All right, I'm going to close this out. I'm going to open my next slideshow because I got about a few minutes left. It went very dark. I promise I'll bring it back. My computer shuts off. The screen, I just have to find my social research slides, which are right here. And I will open it, and I will be back in half a second here. I just need to make sure I clear last year's comments, which always start with, are you live streaming today? Because I'm always late turning on the live stream. Okay. So we're going to end off with concepts and theories. Hopefully that was interesting for you. There we go. All right, we're back here. All right, so social research. Hang on, I have to switch this so I can write on my slides. Duplicate slide. Blinky, blinky, good. Okay, so I want to talk really briefly about kind of what is social research. And I don't want to bore you to death with this. It's probably not the most exciting kind of part of the course. And I say this with great love. I teach Introduction to Social Methods. I think I've taught it like 10 times. I teach it twice a year. So I have a lot of affinity for social research methods and teaching people, all at the same time recognizing it's not the most exciting topic. So we're going to jump in. We're going to talk a little bit about social research. I should be done it relatively quickly, so just bear with me. But I want you to understand what social research looks like, because I think any introduction to sociology that doesn't at least talk about what we do is kind of lacking. Okay, for the first midterm, if we don't get to finish our 4th unit, will you be tested on it? No. Also, yes, you were first here. So whatever, the cutoff is always whatever we talked about last, right? So if we only cover 3 units, and that's probably where we're going to be, we only are going to test on 3 units, and that 4th unit, which I think is socialization, will be pushed off until the 2nd midterm. And maybe some topic will be trimmed down or cut altogether at the end of the term. Concepts and theories always takes me longer than I want it to. Okay. So, social theory or social research. How do we do social research? Okay. You talk about levels of experience a little bit, right? Social research in a lot of cases is interested, like sociology thinks of itself as a science, right? So we're very interested in the same way. We're kind of like political science that way. We think of ourselves as a social science, the study of society, and we try to come up with theories, just like poli-sci does. So I make fun of poli-sci, but I'm really just being mean to all of us. But we're interested in, the same kinds of things, learning things about the world through our senses, and then describing them in particular ways, right? So, we are interested in our concrete experiences and the concrete experiences of other people, right? So concrete experiences, you experiencing the world through your senses. Okay, so we can split these into kind of percepts, like the smallest bits of kind of information. So you just seeing me talking up here, right? That is a kind of percept. You seeing me move around. And patterns, right? Collection of percepts, right? So you think of like me and other professors following certain patterns of being, right? Okay, well, I won't test on those, but they're just kind of basic terms. Okay, abstract experiences, right? I hope you're okay. So, oops, that's supposed to be an arrow. Abstract experiences, right? The imaginary world of the mind, right? And here, what we have principally in, when we talk about abstract experiences that we're interested in sociology, is concepts, right? Abstract terms used to organize concrete experiences, and propositions, right? Basically an idea that results from finding a relationship between concepts, right? So a proposition would be like an argument or a connection between concepts, right? So a concept might be like tiger, right? You have this abstract notion of what a tiger is, right? It's striped, it's orange, it has claws and teeth, right? So these are, kind of the abstract concepts that go along with tiger, right? These are the concepts that you go with it. And a proposition would be, something like tiger equals death. I always think of this one video I saw of I think it's like a tiger preserve somewhere, and there's this couple driving down, and then the wife gets out because the husband and wife are fighting, and she goes up to his window and starts yelling at him through the window, and then a tiger comes up from behind her and grabs her and drags her into the forest. Tigers equal death, right? Good proposition. Okay, so one of the key things that sociology is sort of trying to do is move us from, all right, here, how to put this. We make a lot of observations about the world, right? Just you out there in the world, you're observing things all the time. But there's a lot of problems with our patterns of perception, right? We make a lot of mistakes, right? Because we only see a small slice of the social world, right? We only see a small slice of the world. We can sometimes make all sorts of assumptions that are unfounded. And in a lot of cases, they're grounded in unscientific thinking, right? Often thinking that makes a couple, some common errors. And the goal of sociology is to try and move our thinking socially from unscientific to scientific thinking, right? Something a little bit more systematized and a little bit more analytical. Okay, so roughly speaking, right? Some of the kind of unscientific forms of knowledge, right, and mistakes that people make. One of them is relying on tradition, right? So there's a lot of traditional forms of knowledge that will propose certain things, right? That we might assume to be true, right? So something like chicken soup to cure a cold, right? The idea that there is some kind of connection between chicken soup and the common cold, right? And that somehow soup in and of itself has healing properties. Now, in the case of my grandmother, this was not soup, but pepper vodka, my very Ukrainian grandmother. And I remember as a 16-year-old, having my grandmother come over when I had a cold and my parents were gone, and her being like, drink this. And learning very quickly that I don't like pepper vodka. So that was fun. But there's lots of traditional knowledge, right? Things that maybe are contained within cultures that might not necessarily be true. Okay, authority. Wow, I just hear nothing but coughing. Everybody's falling apart. The plague has hit us. It's COVID again. We're all gonna die. No, eventually, not today. Okay, authority. So my professor said it's true, or a doctor I saw on TV said that this was the case, so it must be true, right? Arguments from authority are not necessarily false, but relying on authority can lead to unscientific thinking because it assumes that just because someone has authority, what they say is authoritative. Okay, casual observation. So, casual observation. Most of the time, we are not paying attention to the kind of global picture of things around us, right? We make kind of casual observations about the world all the time. And then we can extrapolate incorrectly from that data, right? So, one of mine is that people who drive Dodge Ram trucks on the Anthony Henday are psychopaths. Right? Because the number of times I have been cut off by someone driving a Dodge Ram on the Henday, those are considerable in number. However, what's probably true is that there's a lot of Dodge Rams that drive in perfectly safe conditions on the Henday. I tend to notice it when they cut me off, right? And so I'm going to be like, Rams equals crazy people. But really, this is a problem of casual observance, right? I'm not paying enough attention to all of the times that someone driving a Dodge Ram is driving in a perfectly safe manner. Okay, so hopefully, does that all make sense so far? Do I have a question slide somewhere? Way too far back? Wow, I don't have them. Oh, the stream is still dark. Thank you for telling me. You will have to live with that tension, but you're right, I forgot to switch the... I have too many windows open, by the way. Oh, okay. There we go. Perfect. Okay, I fix it. Stream is still dark. Video is not working. First couple slides are dark. First couple slides not covered in the PDF. Wrong notes. Okay. Truck owners are a menace to road safety. Is gambling unscientific? Oh, 100%. By the way, gambling is 100% unscientific. If you taught people proper probabilities in high school, no one would ever gamble because you would realize how unlikely it is for you to win. Especially like playing the lottery, no one would ever play the lottery. Okay, so, all right, casual observation. Overgeneralization, right? Taking the, like, overgeneralizing, you know, especially casual observations to make big, broad statements, right? You know, taking sometimes the exception or the edge case and generalizing to the whole sample, right? This is, you know, so in a sense, like my casual observation about the Ram trucks, you know, is also an overgeneralization, right? Or this person who commented, right? Trucks are a road hazard or whatever, right? This is an overgeneralization. Not all truck drivers are dangerous. Most truck drivers probably drive perfectly safely. You're overgeneralizing from those that you see driving unsafely, of which there are presumably many. Okay, and then selective observation, right? You might call this confirmation bias. My pen is lagging. Right? Seeing what you want to see and ignoring the rest, right? And human beings, even sociologists, have a tremendous ability, you know, for confirmation bias, only seeing what you want to see, right? Seeing the parts of the evidence that might suggest the story you want them to tell. Okay, so qualification, you know, it's true in most cases, but not that one, right? So you might be like, okay, you know, if we've got our bell curve, right, and this is our kind of average, you know, you might say, okay, yes, this is true for, you know, most cases, right? This is the average, but it doesn't apply to me, right, because I'm special, or it doesn't apply to, you know, most kids, like, here, I'll put it this way. This is my son when it comes to screen time. I can tell him the studies, right? That over X amount of screen time, you know, is something like over, for his age, over about 1.5 hours of screen time leads to, you know, decreases in happiness, increased mood disorders, and all sorts of things. And he's like, yeah, that's the average, perfect, that's everybody else who's here, but I'm special, like I'm out here. So it doesn't matter for me, because it might be true in most cases, but it's not true for me, right? My son and his screen time use, right? I honestly think he would sell his little brother to slave traders in order to play 5 more minutes of Fortnite most days. And I'm not exaggerating, you know, but he always sees himself as outside the norm, right? So he's having that qualification. He can accept that it's probably not good for most people to play 10 hours of Fortnite a day, but tell him that he's not able to, and he instantly kind of goes apoplectic. All right, illogical reasoning, seeing patterns where none exist. Oop. Conspiracy theories. Right? Conspiracy theories are a form of illogical reasoning because they see patterns where no patterns exist, right? And there's, you know, endless examples of conspiracy theories that we can think about, right? The contrails are, you know, chemicals put out by the United States government to sterilize the population, right? We have so many jets flying over with contrails, and what do we have in Canada? A declining birth rate. It must be the contrails from the airplanes causing the declining birth rate. That's a conspiracy theory. It's a form of illogical reasoning, right? Where you're seeing 2 pieces of evidence that might be true in and of themselves, and you're linking them in a way that doesn't make sense. Okay, I got 10 minutes left. I can probably do a couple more, and I will let you go. I know this is like the furthest building from where everybody has to be next. Okay, ego defense. Including me, I have to be back in Tory at like 2 o'clock, so. Ego defense, right? Refusing to accept contradictory evidence. We see a ton of this, right? like someone being so committed to a position that no matter what, like, and they've internalized it, right? It's become part of their identity, so that no matter what contrary evidence is presented, they will never believe that somehow, that thing isn't true, right? They refuse to accept contradictory evidence because it goes against what they want to believe, right? Okay. I won't give examples. I think you can all imagine them. I'm just trying to think of one that will offend nobody. Because people hold things. I just think, like, yesterday, Joe Biden pardoned his entire family preemptively back to 2014, which to me seems a little suspicious. And I'm not inherently partisan, nor do I dislike Joe Biden in any particular way. But I thought it was kind of weird. But then I was watching MSNBC, and people were like, this doesn't prove anything. It doesn't prove that there was corruption in the Biden family. I'm like, sure, kind of looks like there probably was, when you pardon your family going back to 2014. It seems like a really arbitrary date, but whatever. I don't know why, but, somehow people have attached themselves to Joe Biden as the bestest best man that ever was born, better than Jesus or Mohammed or the Buddha or anything. And he could never have done anything wrong. So that probably offended like 10 people just now. So I'm sorry. It's just the only example that came to mind. Like I said, I got nothing against Biden, but, kind of a weird thing to do. Okay, premature closure of inquiry. This to me, and again, people might hate me for saying this. When people say the science is settled, it always makes me cringe a little bit. Not because I'm like a climate change denier or a vaccine denier or anything, but I just hate the phrase because it always sounds to me like premature closure of inquiry. It's like, well, we don't need to ask any more questions. The science is settled, right? No new science could ever come along. This is also, I always laugh about this a little bit. I don't know recently I've been trying to get into shape because I'm not in shape and it's, high blood pressure and high cholesterol, all this shit. It sucks to be 40. I'll put it that way. Never be 40. Actually, all get to be 40. Don't die before you turn 40. That'd be tragic. But on Twitter X, I'm now subjected, because it's tracking me somehow, to all sorts of health influencer content. And they're like, did you know that in 1972, they thought this, what we consider high cholesterol today, was normal? And it's like, what has changed? Is it the pharmaceutical industry? So that has a conspiracy theory in it too. But I'm like, no shot. Maybe our scientific understanding of the human body got better in the last 55 years. It's possible. But it's like, we don't need to know anything else that happened after 1970 because it suits my narrative, right? So this is kind of premature closure of industry. Why do I always say industry every time I say this? Inquiry. It's like, we don't need to know anything else. We know everything there is to know. The science is settled. Shut up, right? And again, this can lead to a failure to examine things with better tools and better methods. Okay, and mystification is the last one. And how am I doing for time? We'll call mystification all we got for today. Don't pack up yet. Wait until I explain it. Please. Okay. Mystification, right? There are greater forces at work than we can understand, so it's not even worth trying to figure it out, right? God is doing it, right? We don't need to explain how life got here because it was obviously God, so we don't need any theory of evolution, right? Or there are just forces that we don't understand. It's the force or something in the cosmos that's happening. We can't possibly understand what's going on, so it's not even worth trying to figure it out. Okay, those are our forms of unscientific thinking. We'll continue on next time. Yes. All right, I'll answer these next time. I have no idea what half of these mean. Okay, cool. Have a good day. I'm going to turn the mic off. More batteries? Of course.
the first three slides that are missing, we don't even know that information.
I may have just. Oh, so let me just see. Like these ones. Like
this, that, yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing super important there, so don't worry about it. Okay,
I have a question that's too long to write on the side of it.
perfect.
I'm taking political science and this right now, and
Yes.
it's messing with how I think about both.
Okay.
So
I mostly joke about political science. It's more.
in the case of like the truck drivers, let's say like this is like completely I've not looked into it at all. But let's say it's like teenagers or like the bad drivers. Like you looked into that, and it was like teenagers or overall bad drivers. Could you like is it scientific or unscientific?